Picture this. Deep in the Amazon's emerald heart, where ancient trees tower like cathedral pillars, a nightmare unfolds in slow motion. Coiled around a tiny, helpless baby gorilla, a massive anaconda tightens its deadly embrace, while a mother's anguished cries pierce the humid air. What happened next would shatter every assumption about the wild's merciless laws and reveal a truth so profound it would leave even the most hardened observers speechless, their hearts forever changed by an act that defied nature itself.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you.
In the dense canopy of the Congo Basin, where morning mist clings to towering mahogany trees like ghostly fingers, terror struck without warning. The air hung thick with humidity and the earthy scent of decomposing leaves when nature's most unlikely predator appeared. A colossal green anaconda, nearly 22 feet of pure muscle and ancient hunger, had somehow found its way deep into gorilla territory, thousands of miles from its natural Amazonian home. Its massive olive-green coils, thick as telephone poles and marked with dark diamond patterns, wrapped around 6-month-old Kesi with suffocating precision. The baby gorilla's tiny black fingers clawed desperately at the suffocating embrace, his small chest rising and falling in increasingly shallow breaths. Each passing second tightened the serpent's grip like a living vice, methodically squeezing the precious life from the innocent creature. The forest floor, usually carpeted with the constant rustle of small creatures and the distant calls of tropical birds, fell into an eerie, unnatural silence. Even the ever-present hum of insects seemed to pause, as if nature itself held its breath, witnessing this impossible encounter between two worlds that should never have collided. Ancient ferns stood as silent witnesses, while towering buttress roots created natural amphitheaters around this deadly drama. High above, where golden shafts of sunlight pierced through the emerald canopy, other primates had fled in terror. The very air seemed to thicken with dread as Kesi's struggles grew visibly weaker. His once bright brown eyes began to dim. His tiny hands that should have been learning to swing from branch to branch, now fighting a losing battle against death's relentless coils. This was no ordinary predator-prey encounter. This was something far more sinister, a collision of ecosystems that defied explanation, where South America's apex constrictor had somehow materialized in the heart of Africa to claim an impossible victim. The jungle's natural order had been shattered, leaving only raw terror and the ticking countdown of a baby's fading heartbeat.
Amara stood frozen in absolute horror, just 12 feet away, her massive silverback frame trembling with a helplessness she had never known. This powerful matriarch, who could snap thick branches like matchsticks and command respect from every creature in her domain, found herself utterly powerless against this serpentine nightmare. Her broad chest, covered in coarse black fur that had weathered countless storms, heaved with panic as she watched her beloved Kesi's struggles growing weaker by the second. Every fiber of her maternal being screamed at her to charge forward, to attack with the fury of a protective mother, to use her 400-pound frame to crush this invader. But the anaconda's strategic position made any direct assault impossible. One wrong move in her own powerful hands could crush the very life she was desperate to save. Her deep brown eyes, usually calm pools of ancient wisdom, now burned with a desperation so raw and primal it seemed to shake the towering trees around her. She beat her massive chest with thunderous strikes that echoed through the forest like war drums, but the sound carried no authority, no dominance. Instead, it was the broken rhythm of a mother's heart shattering in real time. Her roars, which normally sent lesser predators fleeing in terror, now emerged as gut-wrenching cries of anguish that pierced the humid air like arrows of pure grief. Amara's powerful legs, built for scaling the tallest trees and carrying her family to safety, now felt like lead anchors pinning her to the forest floor. She paced frantically in small circles, her knuckles scraping against moss-covered roots as her mind raced through impossible scenarios. How could she, the undisputed queen of this domain, be reduced to a helpless spectator to her own child's execution? The weight of her powerlessness crushed down upon her massive shoulders as she watched the light slowly fading from Kesi's innocent eyes, knowing that all her strength meant nothing in this moment of ultimate crisis.
Through the dense undergrowth of twisted vines and broad-leafed vegetation, a figure moved with the silent grace of decades spent mastering the art of invisibility. Jingo, an elderly male chimpanzee, had been methodically foraging for termites when the first anguished roars shattered the morning tranquility. At 42 years old, he was ancient by wild standards. His once jet-black fur now streaked with silver around his weathered face and graying at the edges of his long, muscular arms. Chimpanzees and gorillas shared these vast Congo forests, but maintained strict territorial boundaries. Different families, different social structures, different ways of navigating the complex hierarchy of jungle life. Jingo had survived 4 decades in this unforgiving wilderness by perfecting a simple philosophy: avoid conflict, stay invisible, mind your own survival. His shrewd amber eyes had witnessed countless territorial disputes, predator attacks, and natural disasters, but he had always remained a shadow, slipping away before trouble could find him. Now, he crouched behind a natural barrier of massive ferns and fallen logs, their emerald fronds providing perfect camouflage for his graying form. His weathered hands, scarred from years of climbing and foraging, gripped a sturdy fallen branch as his intelligent gaze took in the horrific scene unfolding mere yards away. Every survival instinct honed over decades screamed at him to retreat deeper into the forest, to put as much distance as possible between himself and this nightmare that belonged to another species entirely. His heart hammered against his ribcage as he watched the impossible drama: an Amazonian giant terrorizing an African family in a collision of continents that defied all natural law. The smart move, the safe move, would be to fade back into the jungle's embrace and pretend he had never witnessed this tragedy. After all, gorilla problems were not chimpanzee concerns, and at his age, heroics were a luxury he could hardly afford.
In her frantic desperation, Amara's tear-filled gaze swept across the forest floor like a searchlight cutting through darkness, seeking anything, anyone who might offer even the slimmest hope. Her massive head swiveled from left to right, scanning every shadow, every cluster of vegetation, every possible hiding place where salvation might be lurking. Then, through the maze of ferns and fallen logs, her eyes locked onto something that made her breath catch in her throat. There, partially concealed behind the broad leaves of a massive philodendron, sat Jingo. Their eyes met across the species divide in a moment that seemed to freeze time itself. 2 completely different evolutionary paths, separated by millions of years of genetic divergence and territorial boundaries, suddenly converged in this single electric instant of shared understanding. The old chimpanzee felt the full weight of her stare penetrating straight through his carefully constructed camouflage. Those deep brown gorilla eyes, normally radiating the quiet confidence of absolute dominance, now held something entirely different: raw, unfiltered pleading that transcended every barrier nature had erected between their kinds. Amara took a tentative step toward his hiding spot, her massive 400-pound frame moving with surprising delicacy, as if she feared that any sudden motion might shatter this fragile moment of connection. Her enormous hands, capable of crushing bones, now trembled with barely contained anguish as she extended one arm slightly in his direction.
For decades, she had ruled these forests as an undisputed queen, commanding respect through sheer physical presence and territorial dominance. Gorillas bowed to her authority, lesser primates fled from her path, and even leopards thought twice before challenging her family. Yet now she stood before this elderly chimpanzee, a creature she had probably never spoken to in her entire life, completely stripped of pride and power.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Her eyes held no trace of the hierarchical superiority that typically defined interspecies encounters. Instead, they radiated the universal language of desperate parenthood, asking the impossible of a stranger who owed her absolutely nothing.
What happened next shattered every established rule of jungle hierarchy and social order. Amara, the undisputed matriarch of her domain, slowly lowered her massive frame toward the earth in a gesture that would have been unthinkable under any other circumstances. Her powerful knuckles touched the moss-covered ground as she assumed a position of complete submission, something no gorilla of her status had ever done before another species. With movements that seemed to carry the weight of absolute desperation, she extended one enormous arm toward Django's hiding place, then pointed with trembling fingers toward her dying baby. Her other hand pressed against her chest, over her heart, in a gesture so fundamentally human it sent chills through the humid air. No words passed between them. Gorillas and chimpanzees shared no common language, but the communication transcended every barrier evolution had ever constructed. Her deep brown eyes, now pools of liquid anguish, never left Django's weathered face as she conveyed a message clearer than any roar or territorial display. She was asking, no, begging this elderly stranger to risk his own life for her child. The plea reached across millions of years of evolutionary separation, from one parent's heart to another, carrying the weight of unconditional love that knows no boundaries. In that suspended moment, ancient territorial instincts crumbled beneath something infinitely more powerful. This wasn't gorilla to chimpanzee, predator to prey, or queen to subject. This was mother to father, parent to parent. One desperate soul crying out to another in the universal language of love and loss. Django felt something shift deep in his chest as he witnessed this magnificent creature who could crush him without effort, humbling herself completely for the sake of her offspring. The sight of such raw vulnerability from such a powerful being created a bridge across the species divide that neither had ever imagined possible. Time seemed frozen as two different worlds collided in this moment of unprecedented connection, where survival instincts yielded to something far more primal and profound.
Django's mind erupted into chaos as 42 years of survival wisdom battled against something he had never felt before. His arthritis-worn joints, which ached on the best of days, screamed in protest at the mere thought of confronting a 22-foot anaconda. His reflexes, once lightning quick in his youth, were now dulled by age and caution. That serpent could easily crush his weathered bones with a single powerful strike, ending his long life in seconds. Every rational thought in his experienced brain commanded him to retreat deeper into the forest's embrace, to let nature follow its brutal course as he had witnessed countless times before. He had survived 4 decades by avoiding exactly these kinds of impossible situations. His trembling hands gripped the fallen branch tighter as memories flooded through him. His own offspring, long grown and scattered across distant territories, their tiny faces when they had once depended on him for everything. But something deeper stirred in his chest, something that refused to be silenced by logic or self-preservation.
He looked at little Kesi, whose movements were growing alarmingly weaker, whose tiny chest barely rose and fell now. The baby's innocent brown eyes, so similar to those of his own children years ago, were beginning to glaze over with the approach of death. Then his gaze returned to Amara, this mighty creature who had reduced herself to desperate begging. In her submission, he saw a truth that transcended species, the lengths to which a parent would go for their child. The sight of such powerful love humbled before him created a seismic shift in his weathered heart. His amber eyes, which had grown cautious and calculating over decades of careful survival, now blazed with something entirely different. The old chimpanzee's weathered hands began to shake, not with fear this time, but with the overwhelming weight of an impossible choice that was becoming inevitable. In that moment, caution crumbled before courage, and survival instinct yielded to something infinitely more powerful than self-preservation.
With movements that surprised himself, Django rose from his concealed position behind the massive ferns. His old legs, which had carried him safely through 4 decades of jungle perils, now propelled him toward mortal danger with a steadiness that defied his advanced age. Each step forward felt like crossing an invisible threshold from observer to participant, from safety to sacrifice. Without hesitation, he approached the towering mahogany tree where the deadly drama was unfolding. His experienced hands, scarred from years of climbing and foraging, found familiar holds on the rough bark with practiced precision. The texture of the ancient wood beneath his weathered palms felt both foreign and familiar as he began his ascent. Foreign because he was climbing toward death, familiar because trees had been his highway through life. This was no ordinary climb. Chimpanzees were natural climbers, but Django's arthritis made every grip painful, every pull upward a battle against his aging body. Yet something beyond physical capability drove him higher, branch by branch, toward the colossal serpent that could end his life with a single strike. The anaconda, its cold reptilian intelligence immediately sensing this new threat, hissed with a sound like escaping steam from the depths of hell. Its massive diamond-patterned head swiveled toward the approaching chimpanzee, yellow eyes reflected in ancient, emotionless hunger. But critically, the serpent faced an impossible choice. It couldn't release its grip on Kesi without losing its hard-won prize, yet it couldn't properly defend itself while maintaining that strangling hold. Django positioned himself on a sturdy branch directly above the writhing mass of muscle and scales. His heart pounded so violently against his ribcage that he could hear it echoing in his ears, drowning out the forest sounds around him. Every survival instinct screamed at him to retreat, but below he could see Amara's anguished face turned upward, watching this impossible rescue attempt with desperate hope flickering in her tear-filled eyes. The old chimpanzee's weathered face set in grim determination as he prepared to pit 4 decades of jungle cunning against raw, prehistoric power.
What erupted next was a battle between decades of accumulated wisdom and 22 feet of pure prehistoric killing machine. Django began his assault with surgical precision, dropping heavy branches, jagged rocks, and chunks of bark directly onto the anaconda's massive skull. Each projectile struck with carefully calculated force, enough to distract and irritate, but not so violent as to cause the serpent to reflexively tighten its death grip on little Kesi. The forest exploded into chaos as the anaconda writhed and struck upward with lightning speed, its massive jaws snapping mere inches from Django's feet. The old chimpanzee's reflexes, honed by 4 decades of avoiding predators, kept him barely ahead of the serpent's attacks. His weathered hands gripped branches with white-knuckled intensity as he swayed and dodged, feeling the rush of air from each near miss that could have ended everything. But Django's strategy was working, albeit at an agonizing pace. With each distraction from above, the Anaconda's coils around Kesi loosened by millimeters. The serpent's cold intelligence was being pulled in 2 directions, maintaining its strangling grip while defending against this unexpected aerial attacker. Its massive head swiveled between targets, confused and increasingly frustrated by this unprecedented challenge to its dominance. However, time was Django's greatest enemy. His aging body couldn't sustain this assault much longer. Sweat poured down his graying face as his arthritic joints screamed in protest. His breathing became labored, and his aim with the falling debris grew less precise with each passing second. Below, he could see Kesi's struggles growing weaker, the baby's tiny chest barely rising and falling now. The Anaconda, sensing its attacker's fatigue, began to adapt its position more strategically. It coiled its massive tail around the tree trunk for stability while trying to secure its prey and defend simultaneously. In that moment of repositioning, its grip shifted slightly, and Django saw the opening he had been desperately creating.
With a speed that defied every limitation of his aging body, Django launched himself downward on a thick vine, his weathered hands burning against the rough fiber as he descended directly into the serpent's striking range. In one fluid motion that combined 4 decades of arboreal experience with desperate courage, he grabbed Kesi's tiny, outstretched arm and pulled with every ounce of strength his elderly frame could summon. The forest erupted in pandemonium as the Anaconda's coils finally gave way under the combined pressure of the rescue attempt and its own confused defensive posturing. The massive serpent, caught off guard by this direct assault, loosened its death grip just enough for the baby gorilla to slip free from its muscular prison. Kesi tumbled through the air, still clutched in Django's protective embrace as the furious Anaconda struck at the space they had just occupied. With reflexes that amazed even himself, Django swung both of them to safety on a high, sturdy branch, just as the serpent's massive jaws snapped shut on empty air below. The sound of those powerful jaws slamming together echoed through the canopy like a gunshot, a chilling reminder of how close death had come to claiming them both. Amara rushed forward with earth-shaking strides, her massive arms extended upward toward her precious child. With infinite gentleness that contrasted sharply with her enormous strength, she received little Kesi from Django's trembling hands. The baby gorilla, though weak and traumatized, was unmistakably alive, his tiny chest rising and falling in rapid, grateful breaths as he clung desperately to his mother's familiar warmth. The Anaconda, realizing its prize was permanently lost and facing an increasingly hostile environment, began its slow, menacing retreat into the forest's depths. Its massive coils disappeared between the ferns and fallen logs like a nightmare dissolving in daylight, leaving behind only the memory of terror and the miracle of an impossible rescue. The Congo Basin seemed to exhale in collective relief as normal forest sounds gradually returned to the canopy, birds resuming their calls, insects buzzing back to life. As Django prepared to quietly fade back into the forest's embrace, seeking no recognition for his extraordinary act, Amara did something that would forever change both of their lives. She approached the exhausted old chimpanzee with steps as gentle as falling leaves and extended her massive palm toward his weathered hand. When their fingers touched, hers powerful enough to crush stone, his trembling with exhaustion, something profound passed between them that transcended millions of years of evolutionary separation. In that simple gesture lay the recognition of what had just occurred, a moment where love conquered fear,
where compassion obliterated the boundaries that nature had supposedly carved in stone. This wasn't merely a rescue. It was living proof that in our deepest moments of crisis, salvation can emerge from the most unexpected sources, carried by the most unlikely heroes. The touch between gorilla and chimpanzee became a bridge across time itself, connecting two souls who had discovered that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. Django had risked everything, not for glory or reward, but simply because he recognized the universal language of a parent's desperate love. In that recognition, he found a strength that surpassed every physical limitation his aging body possessed. This extraordinary encounter reveals a truth that echoes far beyond the Congo's canopy. Sometimes our greatest power lies not in our ability to dominate others, but in our capacity to lift them up when they need it most. It reminds us that heroism rarely announces itself with fanfare. Instead, it often appears quietly, in the form of an elderly stranger who chooses to see another's pain as their own responsibility. As the forest returned to its natural rhythms, and both families went their separate ways, they carried with them an unshakable understanding that compassion knows no boundaries. In a world that often emphasizes our differences, this remarkable story whispers a different truth, that our capacity for connection, for sacrifice, for love itself, transcends every barrier we think divides us.
Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.